Hello and welcome to this week's bonus episode of Planet Critical, the podcast for a world in crisis. My name is Rachel Donald. I'm an independent climate corruption journalist exposing greenwashing and investigating the financial and political corruption driving the climate crisis around the world. And of course, producing this podcast, which is all about exposing the big picture as to why the world is in crisis today and what to do about it. This week I spoke with Mike Joy, who's a freshwater ecologist, about, well, everything. About the gridlock in modern politics, about art, about technology, about how to live a better life, about how to communicate that to people. And also some very interesting details on how industry in New Zealand is driving cancer rates in its population, for example. So I would highly suggest you go and check out the episode. It was absolutely fascinating speaking with Mike. One of the things that we discussed, and what I think I would like to explore more in today's little bonus video, is about how to accurately target those driving the crisis. I think one of the problems that we face as civilians who are concerned about the state of the world today is that because of the dearth of information out there, it can be too easy to give sweeping accusations. So say, blame an industry or blame politics in general. We tend to sort of villainize concepts rather than really accurately pinning down the names of oligarchs and corrupt individuals who are driving the state of the world and profiteering from it. And I think also focusing on concepts impinges our ability to accurately envision solutions to the problems that we face. We need to be pointing fingers at individuals. We need to be publishing lists of names, not just of companies, but of the people running those companies and the connections that they have to governments, for examples. We need lists of the subsidies that are propping up destructive industries, and we need lists of the ministers who are granting those subsidies year in, year out. And yes, that information all exists in disparate silos, but we need to be collating it to create a really clear picture of who is running the world into the ground. One of the things that Mike and I discuss in the episode is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So for anybody that doesn't know what that is, it's essentially a triangle that shows on the first level, the basic level, what we need is, I think it's shelter, water, and food. The second level is, I'm going to forget, community, something, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, right up to the top where the last hierarchy is art and thought and all of this kind of stuff. And essentially it's showing that you can only, the hypothesis is that you can only advance from one level to the next once you have those initial needs fulfilled. Now, something that I brought up during the episode is that I think the hierarchy is misleading. What is a world without art? This is something I was kind of harping on about a few months ago. But what is so interesting when we think about the future of the climate crisis is that we can look to where financing is already being cut and kind of reference it to those hierarchy of needs to see exactly what would happen if we got to a stage where the climate crisis demanded energy rationing, for example, and those who are in power now, these kinds of people, continue to be in power and make those decisions for people. So, for example, I said in the UK, funding for the arts has been dramatically cut, education over the past decade, as if those are not things that we need. And I firmly believe that it is a crisis of imagination that is also hobbling people from responding to the crisis. And the fact that governments are not investing in those things that promote imagination and promote community only really reveal either intention, I think, for, a few, or just a lack of awareness of how important these things actually are to communities and to individuals. I think I asked at one point in the episode, like, at what point do we all start rioting? They're cutting our access to the very things that make human life so special and magical. Is it going to be when we get down to the bottom of the hierarchy and our shelter and our food starts to go that we start rioting? Can we flip and look at the other side of what I'm saying and say, actually, Maslow's hierarchy of needs shows that which we do need, and therefore any cuts that is being done already to these fundamentally crucial parts of human life, like art, like community, need to be lambasted and need to be fought against before they come for our food and our shelter? I think essentially the point that I'm getting at is that we need to protect the things that we love before those things are chosen for us. And those things are already being chosen for us by governments and also by the paradigm, i.e. the economic system that we live in, the way that our food production is set up, the types of fuel that we use. But that should be a grave warning in a world where we know that we are running out of resources, because we know already exactly what would happen. We do not have to imagine a Mad Max anarchy scenario, I think, for the future. We know fine well that resources would be pooled amongst a very small group of people, and the 99%'s access to art, to community, to choice, to autonomy would be taken away. Because that's already what is happening. It's a conversation my friends and I have sometimes. Like, why aren't we rioting already? Yes, we're protesting, and yes, there is phenomenal organization going on in activist movements. But why aren't we rioting? The things that we need for a happy life, for a connected life, for a meaningful life, are being taken from us slowly but surely. And this is a formula that will only be repeated, strengthened, and will gradually disempower people, even more so than we already are. When it comes down to food production, to running out of food, and we are on the verge of such catastrophe. The Economist last month published their whole front page was about the upcoming wheat crisis. And George Monbiot wrote a piece in The Guardian about this as well, clearly explaining it's not a problem of production, it is a problem of economics. Food production is on the rise in the world, always has been, and yet people have less and less access to food now than they did 5 years ago. And that's because of economics. That's because of capitalism. When it comes to that stage, people are forced to think about their community suddenly becomes much smaller. Whereas if we try and focus on what we currently have or want to have more of, things that are higher up in Maslow's hierarchy, such as education, such as art, I keep coming back to art, but I really do think it's important, then we have a better chance of working as a collective, because it's not our physical survival that is on the line. When everybody's physical survival is on the line, I believe what we will see is more of a fracturing of community rather than a coming together. Perhaps communities will come together on a smaller scale, but in terms of, like the British population, speaking out against decisions that are being made, well, that's not what it will look like, because it won't be a case of speaking out at that point. It will be a case of being forced to act to feed oneself. I mean, we already saw that in the Arab Springs. That was 7 consecutive missed meals, and there was a revolution, and it's triggered a series of crises in the region that they have not recovered from, and that has desperately hurt the most vulnerable there. We must protect the things we love, or they will be chosen for us. And not only are we running out of time to deal with the climate crisis, we are running out of the time where we have the autonomy and the power to make choices for ourselves. And if we don't choose collective action, then I think we're essentially belatedly or latently choosing riots. We're so fortunate, for those of us living in the West, to have access to not only luxuries, but high quality of life, even if that quality of life is decreasing for many. We have seen other regions in the world fall into disrepair and into chaos. We've seen other parts of the world never had the opportunity to flourish because of our rapacious use of their resources. It is really foolish to think that that cannot happen on our shores too. We are blinded by our own luck, essentially. And if you, like me, aren't feeling particularly lucky anymore, as you zoom further and further out on this crisis and take a look at the big picture as to what's happening around the world, then I think that is our call to action to do something about it. If anyone has any ideas, drop a comment below. Thank you all for tuning in. Do let me know what you think, as I said, by leaving a comment below. And also, if there's somebody that you would like for me to interview on this podcast, leave it below. I will see it. I will try to get them on. If you're new here, remember to subscribe. If you enjoyed this little appendage of thoughts, please do share it. And if you're enjoying the podcast, support the project on the Planet Critical Patreon page. To the Planet Critical community who is supporting the podcast and my work, thank you so much. None of it would be possible without you all. Thank you all for watching. I hope this was valuable to you, and I will see you next week.